most people want to continue to grow. And so you hit a point where you've grown as far as you had imagined before, and you feel like you should be okay in the place that you're at because this is what you've been building towards. But there's like a whole nother level beyond it that you haven't really started imagining yet. Or maybe you've started imagining it, but you're torn between a couple decisions. I think that most people end up getting stuck because they hit a point and they have 2 or 3 decisions to make, and it becomes so stymieing because they haven't been there yet. So they can't make that decision based off of their experience.
That was Becca Ribbing, and you're listening to episode 308 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Fear is not logical. It's primal.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this episode of the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. Tell me if you have ever felt yourself feeling stuck. Feeling like you've gotten to a point in your life and you just aren't sure what direction to go in next. You know, it's funny when I hear from people in that situation, typically it comes up in a couple of ways. Either a big life experience has really flipped things upside down for them, and they feel like their outlook going forward is different than it has been up until that point. And it can become a little bit constraining to think about, well, what direction do I go in going forward now with this new information or this new outlook or this new purpose or this new thought pattern? I'm just not sure. Or for some people, maybe they've accomplished everything they thought they could possibly accomplish, and now they're wondering what's next. It's that yucky unmoored feeling where you feel like you don't have a direction and you're not sure where to go. That stuck feeling can creep up on us in a lot of different ways, and ultimately the thing that it has in common is that we just don't like it very much. You know, the clip that I played at the beginning of this episode is a testament to that. We love the notion that we're continuing to grow, we're continuing to make forward progress, and when we feel stuck, when that progress is halted for some reason, it just doesn't feel very good. Tell me if you've ever felt that way. I know I have, on a lot of occasions. That's what we're going to be talking about today in this episode. And we're talking about it from the lens of a lot of the topics and concepts that we cover in this podcast, but it's coming together in a way that is so helpful to think about how you might approach the next chapter of your life. I mean, heck, we're all contemplating that right now, aren't we? As the state of the world continues to morph and change with COVID and everything that comes with it, we're contemplating what that next chapter might look like. What have I learned up until now, and what do I want to do differently going forward? And it can be tough to navigate that transition. Today in this episode, we are speaking with a woman named Becca Ribbing. She is the author of the Clarity Journal and has been a coach for over a decade. And she's on a mission to help people break out of the cycles of uncertainty and struggle that hold them back so that they can stop going around in circles and finally figure out what they truly want and create the clarity and momentum they crave. The life designer in me was so excited to have this conversation, and also the person in me who is so passionate about the concepts of mindfulness and of self-care. Not self-care like bubble baths, but self-care like true self-care that supports you in being your best and showing up to your life in the way that you want to. Oh man, that part of me was so excited to have this conversation. We talk about all of that and more with Becca in this episode. And there's a particular thing that I want to highlight that came out of the end of this episode that neither Becca nor I had ever thought about before. And it's funny because the more I have these conversations, the more I wrestle through these topics with these guests, the more insight comes out of a topic that I've thought about for so long. It's amazing, something like mindfulness or emotional intelligence, that there's still juice to squeeze there, but there is. And, today we talked about at the back end of this episode, we talked about the notion of self-care, this surface level notion of self-care, where just go get in a bubble bath and you'll feel better. That stress you feel, the anger you feel, the resentment you feel, you'll feel better. Go get a manicure. Do some yoga. And I'm not saying that any of those things aren't great. Like, my God, I love bubble baths. I love yoga. I love taking that time for myself. But if we look at our own emotions as being so surface level that something like a bubble bath could take them away, to what degree are we validating those emotions? To what degree are we saying, yes, those emotions are valid, they are logical, they come from somewhere. They came from a place where a boundary of mine is not being respected, or I'm being overworked, or systemically the way that my household or my job or some major aspect of my life, systemically the way that it works is not working for me, and that's where that anger comes from. We have this amazing conversation on the back half of this episode, and you will not want to miss it, about validating our own emotions as purely logical and true and worthwhile to explore and to understand the information that they bring to us, what they tell us about what we truly desire, and how this surface level of self-care kind of cheapens that. It was so good. I'd never thought about it that way before. Becca admitted she had never thought about it that way before, and that is the value of continuing to have these conversations, and that is the value of you continuing to come back to these conversations. The more we peel back layers, the more deeply we understand these topics, the more powerfully we can apply them to our lives. So friends, if you've ever felt stuck, if you are feeling stuck, if you foresee in the future at some point you could feel that way, this is the episode for you, and I can't wait for you to meet Becca Ribbing. Becca, I'm so excited that you're here with us for this episode because we're talking about kind of the melding of a couple of topics that I'm really passionate about. So it's going to be a fun conversation today.
Thanks for having me on.
So you wrote a book that is really exciting to me. It's called The Clarity Journal. Can you give us a little snippet overview of your book and why you wrote it?
Yeah. So I actually wrote it when I was at a crossroads myself. I had just had a baby, or he was maybe one, and I was trying to figure out what direction I was going to go in, blending my second child in with my work life. And my second child was a little bit more difficult than my first child. He had a lot of ear infections and stuff. So not like difficult, like in his own fault, but difficult.
Yeah.
Life became a little more chaotic. And so I was talking to a friend and going back and forth about some of these career decisions I needed to make. And she paused me and she's like, Becca, you're a career coach. You've been a career coach for a very long time. What would you tell yourself? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. You know, when you have your friend ask you that type of question and you just have to stop and think and be like, I hate you right now. But you're right.
Yes.
So I went down and wrote 30 prompts out. Like, what do I ask my clients? How do I help people through this process? And as I was writing down the prompts and working through the prompts, I became so much more clear about what should have been obvious to me in the first place, but sometimes you just have to get out of your own mind and you need the outside jarring loose and looking at the problem in a different way. So as I was writing them down, I just realized how powerful it was. And so I ended up making it into a book.
I love it. So the subtitle of this book, for those listening who aren't looking at the same Amazon listing that I'm looking at, says, Find the Clarity and Momentum You've Been Searching For. And what I love about this is that all of us have experienced that feeling, I would dare to say multiple times in our lives, where maybe and I've talked about it with a lot of folks, and it comes in a lot of different ways. And I'm curious about your experience with this, with your clients and with your own personal experience, because I see it coming when like a big event happens. So a baby, a change in relationship status, whether that is, you get into a relationship or maybe one ends. It can also be with big career transitions. But I also find that it can happen for people when like they finally reach that last milestone that's very broadly defined. And then they just become almost unmoored. Like, I'm not searching for this anymore. What do I do? Like, have you noticed that? And maybe even other things with your clients?
Right. Well, I think what ends up happening is we're always growing. And so, with my clients are very intelligent. Most people want to continue to grow. And so you hit a point where you've grown as far as you had imagined before, and you feel like you should be okay in the place that you're at because this is what you've been building towards. But there's like a whole nother level beyond it that you haven't really started imagining yet. Or maybe you've started imagining it, but you're torn between a couple decisions. I think that most people end up getting stuck because they hit a point and they have 2 or 3 decisions to make. And it becomes so stymieing because they haven't been there yet. So they can't make that decision based off of their experience. And so that's when people start going round and round and round in circles. They try to do research, they talk to their friends, but when they talk to people, it's usually talking to them from the framework of the problem itself. And I don't know. I hear a lot of, I don't know. It's so funny to me because when a client comes to me to hire me for the first time, I almost always get this email full of, I don't know. But I get on the phone with them. And after we've talked for 45 minutes, it's really apparent that they do know these 3 things that they need to decide between. And it's not that they don't know what to do. They don't know which to choose. And even looking at a problem from that perspective, taking it out of the I don't knows and I need to choose, it's more empowering.
I love that so much. We talk a lot on this podcast about life design in addition to psychology. And one of the key things in life design is how we frame a problem. And a lot of times when we get in this really sticky situation where we feel like it's murky or we're wading through the mud of not, feeling certain and all of that, it's that we've framed the problem in a way that almost makes it unsolvable. But if we reframe the problem in a way that opens our mind to creative solutions or becomes more of a open-ended question, not a yes or no, this or that question, our minds are allowed to do what they do best. They're allowed to expand and be creative and think about how to problem solve in a new way. But that reframe that you're hitting on right here, I have a few things to choose among, right? That's so different than I don't know what to do. That's so closed down. I love this. That's so good.
And so that's kind of what I love about the clarity journal is it's all these open-ended questions to help you kind of break out of the pattern that you have been thinking about clarity, about your job, and help you really come out of yourself, come out of the framework that you've been focusing on this with, and really just get outside yourself, like shake it up a little bit and be able to be a little more expansive and a little more curious.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get so afraid of making the wrong decision that we can't be curious about that decision.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love that you're mentioning this notion of habits, right? Because I mean, if we have one thing about us psychologically that is both a superpower and a total Achilles heel, it's that we are creatures of habit. We get into these patterns of thinking, patterns of behavior, belief patterns, all of that, response and reactivity patterns that become so second nature, we don't even realize we're in them. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like to recognize that you're even in a pattern and then what to do? Because this feels like such a key piece.
So for a long time, I've been a career coach for over a decade, but for a long time, I also, as a side gig, ran a mindfulness website. And it was really powerful. I had 90 authors just writing for me. It was just a labor of love between all of us. And I think we talk a lot about yoga. We talk a lot about doing meditation, but we really don't talk about bringing mindfulness into our own lives. And to me, the most important thing about mindfulness is being mindful about what is going on in your head on a moment by moment basis. And I think the more that you can start to notice when you're anxious or when you're stuck, the easier it is to find the resources to even move yourself out of that, because you can't move yourself out if you don't recognize the problem in the first place.
That's so good. It's a huge distinction, right? Between what happens when you're sitting, quote unquote, on the cushion, right? You're sitting there in meditation. Okay, everybody's going to roll their eyes at me when I say this. It's easy to meditate then. No, it isn't. It is not easy. Meditation, I realize what I just said, but that's where it's easy to think about being mindful. It feels appropriate there. But when your kids run in from school and they're throwing their backpacks down and you're trying to get things ready and the phone is ringing and the dog has to go out and like all the things and the chaos is happening and you're thinking about the 10 things that you didn't get done at work that somehow you have to figure out how to do, and this birthday party and whatever. And I hope everybody's feeling anxious right now, right? Like you start to get that's the moment, not on the cushion when you've blocked everything out and you're there. But to your point, that's the moment when mindfulness becomes such a powerful tool. How do people do that? Like, how do they get there amidst the chaos?
You know, it's really funny. So I actually learned how to meditate from a 13-year-old girl. I was 12 and I was living in New Jersey at the time. And this like California 13-year-old girl came and visited, I think, her aunt for a couple weeks. And
this feels like a childhood drama book that I would have read in high school. I love this already.
And she had a, I guess, Buddhist priest come in and teach meditation in her school. So she was really excited about it. And so she taught me how to meditate. And I was a little geek and I loved like Star Wars. So I was like, this is great. I'm going to start meditating.
Like, I am Yoda.
I am Yoda. And so, and really all she said is you sit cross-legged, put your hands like open on your knees, and you just follow your breath. Like visualize it going in, visualize it going out, in, out. And that is how I learned. It was a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I kind of almost wish everyone, especially adults, could learn how to meditate from children, because we focus so much on releasing the thoughts. We focus on pushing it aside as adults. Like that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be clear-minded, which is great and very refreshing. And it's a good reset. But a big part of mindfulness is to actually notice the thoughts in the first place before you try to push them aside. And so how do you do it in the moment when you've got all those millions of things and you're anxious and like your brain is in overload? It's practice. You're not going to do it well the first day, but being able to consciously pull yourself back to center, be like, okay, what am I feeling? I think sometimes it's easier to be like, what am I feeling in my body right now?
Yeah.
What am I feel like? Okay, my stomach is tight. I am breathing right up in it's audio. So like I'm touching my throat. Like my breath isn't going all the way down to my belly. Like I feel tight in the chest, all of these things. My ears are ringing. Sometimes I get, when I'm stressed, like if I actually sit and think it or like feel, I'll notice like my ears are tense. What is that? But I've got 2 kids and they're loud. And
yes.
it's like, sometimes I want to just go hide under a blanket. And being able to focus on what's going on in your body sometimes brings you back to, okay, my body is reacting to my mind and all of these stressors. And then that becomes like, what can I let go in this moment? Like it's definitely an evolutionary process of noticing, sitting with, and then trying to figure out solutions. And I think so many of us really just try to figure out the solution first. And that's where we are reacting instead of being with. I remember I took a like wildlife rescue class. It was in preparation to become a trail leader for a really big organization back on the East Coast. And the Wildlife Rescue 101, they talked about if you are coming into a medical situation, like you see someone on the ground, you can't run in. You have to pause and take in all of the surroundings and really like ground yourself in like making sure you're aware of all of the surroundings. Cause was there a bear? Like
right.
You really like, is there a venomous snake? Why is he on the ground? Is there like, if you were in a street, like, did he get electrocuted? Like, it's like, is there a wire? Like all of these things actually apply to our own life. Like we try to jump in and fix the thing, but we're usually fixing the wrong thing if we're jumping right in because we're not noticing everything that's going on.
That's so good. That's so good on so many levels. There's something that we talk about in our programs that is worth highlighting here. And that's around one of the things that drives that reactivity is this psychological sense of urgency. It feels like I've walked into an environment, this is happening, whatever it is, like the person's laying on the ground, or my kids are going crazy, or someone's yelling mom from upstairs, or my notifications have blown up on my computer if you're at work, or whatever the case may be. This thing has happened. I'm feeling a sense of urgency to respond. In that situation, what you're feeling the sense of urgency to do is to react. What we want to teach people to do, and what mindfulness does, and I just love that you're hitting on it so perfectly here, is that it takes your rational, deliberative mind and shoves it in between that crazy set of stimuli, that crazy environment, and your reactive response. It puts your mind back in the game, and it creates, don't think physical time. Don't think like seconds are going by in terms of time, right? That's not what we're talking about. It creates the perception of time and space to make a decision. It's psychological. It's not real. We don't bend space time and actually get an extra 15 minutes in there to respond. But you psychologically reduce that sense of urgency and can make a much more clear-headed decision. And so I love that this is part of what you're talking about, because we feel frantic all the time.
Well, we've told, especially women, that they have to do all the things. Like, of course we're frantic. We're not living in a tribe. We're not living with our village. We are on our own. We have to work a full-time job, and that full-time job almost never is 40 hours a week anymore. We have these kids that, my grandmother used to basically put a leash on my dad and stick him outside, like chained to a fence post.
Yeah, go play outside.
Like 3. Right. They don't even, I consciously try to not overschedule my kids, but even with not overscheduling my kids, all of my kids' friends are overscheduled. So I can't really just go tell them to play outside most of the time, because most of the time there's no one around, and it's hard because we do live in this frenetic society that has told us we need to be better. We need to be better. And I read something really beautiful recently, and I'm trying to remember where, because I'm not going to give the person credit for it, unfortunately. But it talked about, instead of thinking about being your best self, think about being your favorite self.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
That just made me
Oh.
stop and pause. Because we do as a society, be your best self. Even in yoga class, be your best self. No, be the person you want to be. Give yourself permission to be that person.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And I love how the tie back, right, to your book is so clear when you think about like trying to make decisions or be creative about what your next step might be. How impossible is that when you're so cluttered and so rigid in a set of habits? Like, how impossible must that be if you're so reactive and trying to respond so quickly to everything around you? That is not conducive for creativity and coming up
If
with a
you're
good direction.
Exactly. If your body's flooded with adrenaline all the time, that's not the space to be creative. That's not the space to solve problems. It's a space to either fight or flight.
Yeah. Ah, I love it. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about then what's in your book and how it can help people find this direction? You mentioned prompts and that type of thing. Give us a little tour.
Okay. So it starts out with really focusing on what's going on that's good in your life. Because I think so many times people have been so focused on the problem for so long that they really ignore the good parts. And then because they ignore the good parts, they don't bring them along. Like I run into this a lot, with 30, 40 something women who have kids and a lot going on. And actually I run into this more and more with 30, 40 something men where they really have a home life that they value. Like we need to include that in, okay, do we really want this job that's going to be 60 hours a week? Like, yes, it's going to be satisfying, but is it going to be satisfying enough for what you're going to give up? So we really talk about like your strengths, all the things that are going well in your life. And then we start diving into what are the decisions you need to make? What are the things that have been holding you back? What habits and patterns do you feel like haven't been helpful for moving you forward? One of the things that I really have noticed just in my professional life is that someone will be like, I need a new job. I need a new job. I hate this job, because they haven't set up boundaries within that job. And then they get the next job and they take that on. Like they still don't have boundaries. And so within 6 months, they're asked to do more and more and more because they always say yes. And it's like, wherever you go, there you are. Right. So helping you really become mindful of what's going on in the present. My favorite, we all have our favorites, right? My favorite prompt in the entire book is, who do you envy and what does that tell you about yourself?
Oh, that's
And
good.
I love it because we envy people who have something in their life that we want. We don't envy the really good politician unless that is something we want in our life.
Yes.
We don't envy the singer unless something about that speaks to us. And we don't envy all politicians. We envy specific politicians, or we envy specific artists or specific writers. What is it about that person that just triggers that in you? And it helps really let go of the envy and bring in appreciation for them. But it also helps you think creatively about what it is you want in your life and why is that resonating?
Yeah, that's so good. Ashley, who joins me for these episodes sometimes, co-founder in Peak Mind, she's a clinical psychologist. One of her big soapboxes is around, we'll call them negative emotions, but emotions that we just tend to not enjoy having. Being envious of other people is something that we don't enjoy, and we don't even like to admit that we are.
Right.
Like, oh no, I would never want blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, you're having a reaction. So yes, you do. And that's okay. And her point, and then when it's so aligned with what you're saying, is these emotions are a quick and easy way to give us a lot of information all in one burst. And especially these difficult emotions that we don't like having: anger, sadness, resentment, envy. Those emotions are information rich if we choose to point ourselves directly at them, admit that we're experiencing them, and glean the information from them that they hold. And it's so beautiful because people who like the life design stuff we talk about, this is squarely it, right? Like, look that envy in the eye and say, what can I learn from it? Because then you're taking that position of like, this emotion that I'm not enjoying is actually becoming a tool for me. It's actually shining a light more clearly on a direction that I can go than I probably could have figured out had I not paid attention to it. It's so good.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've just been taught to suppress anything negative. We suppress. And that's exhausting.
Well, and what must it mean about me if I'm envious of this other person? That must mean I'm not good enough in that area or I'm lacking somehow. And no, you just, it kind of goes back to what you were saying before. Maybe it means if you're envious of that other person, you're setting a goal that's higher than what you had before. You're not lacking, you're leveling up. And now you're envious of a higher level of, skill or a higher level of achievement or something than what you've been able to have before. That's so good. Oh my gosh, that's so good. You also mentioned as we hopped on to record, okay, so we're figuring all this stuff out, whatever. You mentioned an interesting take on self-care. You and I share the annoyance of the bubble bath version of self-care as the be all end all of everything. Like, all you need to solve all your problems is a really good smelling bubble bath. Not really. You had a really cool take on it, and I would love it if you would share it with this audience.
I kind of feel like it's a Band-Aid. Like, we have told people over and over again that if they do these little snippets of self-care, and half of them involve junk food, let's face it. Like, I mean, chocolate or wine or whatnot, it does make you happy in the moment. I will definitely say that there is a place for relaxing in a bubble bath. I love my bubble baths. My bubble bath is not going to solve my career problems. My bubble bath is not going to fix my bad marriage. And I think we've put the stress on people that their problems should be easily fixed. It's like living in a sitcom, like, oh, mom's cranky, she goes, takes a bubble bath, everything's better. And that's not how we live our life. There's a reason why you are cranky. There's a reason why you're angry. Like what you were talking about earlier, like facing those negative emotions. Well, like in my experience, a great deal of negative emotions really come from being unhappy in your job. You are there for 40 hours a week, and we've been trained to just put up with it, and to hope it'll change, and like to lose our agency. When, if you hate your job, if you love your job but hate your boss, any permutation, it's time for another job. It's time to take agency, take back control, be empowered. We talk so much in society about empowering women and yada, yada, yada. But that empowerment is taking control of the situation and making sure that it's working for you. And the bubble bath isn't going to help you take control of your life.
And talk about, too, one piece that I hadn't thought of until you described it in this way is that it's almost like if you're feeling an intense feeling of dissatisfaction or emptiness or lack of fulfillment or anything else, right? That might be a bubble bathable, a bubble bathable emotion. It's almost invalidating that emotion to assume that something so simple is the remedy for it. When in fact, can you validate yourself and say, no, it is completely understandable that you're this angry for these reasons in your job, not because you are emotional. This isn't real. It's not worth it. Go do something indulgent. Can you I'm not telling you not to indulge again or not to relax, but validate your emotions and assume that they're coming from somewhere realistic and logical.
I love that. That is
I had never put it
so
together
powerful.
until you started to describe that. I'm like, oh my God, we are treating our emotions as though they're not real. Like this should just go away. And then when it doesn't, we're wondering why we're so emotional all the time.
Well, and think about like how like just like the trope throughout society for millennia, like I don't know about how many millennia, but definitely throughout like the US's history, like women too emotional, women are too emotional, women are, you know, like crazy, like all of the words that that people use around women who are just feeling anger or just feeling like they don't have power over their lives. Like we've been taught that if we are emotional, there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And we've also, quite frankly, been taught that men aren't emotional when they really are.
Yeah.
And so it is that invalidating, like society invalidates us, and then we learn that and we pull it forward and
we do it to ourselves and to other people. Yeah. And how can you imagine, or how can you expect to make the change that needs to be made, that the emotion is signaling, that your book would help people figure out, if you just think your emotion is something that shouldn't have happened in the first place? There's no real basis there for it. Like, what would it look like? This is a fun thought experiment actually for this audience. What would it look like the next time that you are feeling, again, one of those gritty, yucky ones that we don't like experiencing? What if you just flirted with the fact that, no, this is 100% logical. What does it mean? Like, I'm 100% warranted in having this emotion. Anybody in this situation would have this emotion. What does that mean? Like, what is that signaling about the circumstances, not about me, not there's something wrong with me. What change is it signaling I should make? I'm not saying you have to go do it and like get a divorce and quit your job and burn your house down or anything crazy like that. What I'm saying is just an acknowledgement of, hey, maybe some things do need to shift.
Right.
How freeing. Oh my
I have
God.
Goosebumps.
This is so cool. Okay. So you gave us an amazing prompt from your book. Any chance I can squeeze one more out of you? Like one just for people to think about as, they've been listening to us, bang on the desk and talk about how we need to validate ourselves a little bit more.
I think that a big one that people don't really embrace is, what did you love as a child? Like what, when you were free, before you took on all these social constructs, all of these shoulds, before you went through like all of your schooling, what was it that brought you joy? And pulling yourself back to, and not just necessarily like the things that brought you joy, not the dolls, but like, what was that feeling of freedom like? And what was it that really was forming who you are? Because I think sometimes we lose ourselves, especially once we have kids, and we lose sight of all the good emotions, like all of the really good emotions we're supposed to be feeling too. And sometimes it's easier to focus on it from a childlike perspective, like, oh, I felt this. Unfortunately, that particular question can also be really triggering if you had a lot of trauma as a child. So it's not 100% reliable. But I think even if it does, I mean, hopefully it doesn't trigger too much trauma, but I think that even people that did have a lot of trauma can be like, oh, I didn't feel that as a kid. Like it can help you self-parent a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We've talked about a lot of really important and foundational topics today. I'm curious, as you think about our conversation and in your area of focus, what does it mean to be psychologically strong to you?
To me, it means being mindful about where you are. Just in any given moment, as much as you can, being aware of what is going around and validating your emotions, but also recognizing where your emotions are coming from.
I love that. That's so good. That is so good. there's, when we think about our concept of psych strength, we have it on our website, and there's a reason why mindfulness is in the middle of, we talk about it being 7 different sets of skills, mindfulness being in the core of it because it's required for everything else. And it's such a foundational piece. I love it so much. Where can this audience learn more about you? Where can we buy your book? I would love for you to direct people there if they want more, especially more prompts, because there's something special in getting a prompt from an external person. It just pokes and nudges your mind in a direction that you might not have taken your mind had you not had that prompt. So where can people learn more about you and get your book?
So my book is on Amazon. It's called The Clarity Journal. It's easy to find. And I have, my website is beccaribbing.com. And then you can find me at Twitter and Instagram as well at Becca Ribbing.
Amazing. I'll make sure that we link up your book and your website in this episode description and on your show notes page. So it's really easy for people to navigate there if they want to learn more. I so appreciate you being here. These topics that we've been covering are so foundationally important. You think about it's easy to be grateful when times are good. It's easy to be mindful when things are calm. But those practices that you're talking about help us do that when, the chips aren't falling in a way that we want them to, or when life is more hectic than we want it to be. So it's a really big gift to be reminded that that practice is worthwhile. So thank you so much for being here. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.